Hey everybody, it's Amy Gretchen. Welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to be making my own embellishments using Shrinky Dinks. So if you guys can remember, a few weeks back, I made my own embellishments with the Shrinky Dinks using a stamp set. But today I'm actually just going to be using Posca paint pens and a Sharpie marker, and I want to show you that you can use it with a variety of images. So let's head to my desk and I'll show you how we do it. Guys, so these are the images I'm going to be making the embellishments with. So these images are actually the digital version of a stamp set that came out in Ali Edwards' December Daily stamp set release this year. So if you have the stamp set, you could definitely do this with the stamps and some stays on ink. I do not have the stamp set, but I do have the digital files. And these are available to purchase if you want to do something very similar. Of course, you could do this exact same technique, just getting something from Google, just finding your own images. But I really liked these icons, and so I wanted to create some embellishments using those. So we need an image, and then we also need our Shrinky Dink. So this is some clear Shrinky Dink plastic. I just got it from Amazon. I will have it linked below if you guys want to do the same. They do have white printable as well. So instead of doing the technique that I'm doing now with a Sharpie marker, you could just go ahead and use these same digital files and print them off. But I wanted them to be on the clear plastic, so that is why I am doing it by hand today. The other thing you're going to need is something to color them. Of course, you don't have to color them. You could just leave them clear, but I wanted to color them. And so I'm using some Posca paint pens. You could actually use a different paint medium like colored pencils, but if you're going to use colored pencils, you're going to need to take some sandpaper and really rough up the edges so the colored pencil has something to stick to. So just keep that in mind. So the other thing I wanted you guys to be aware of is how big you want these embellishments to be is going to depend on how big you're either going to print them or we're going to trace them. So I made this little, let me bring this up a little bit so you can see it better. I made this ruler on the plastic and I cut it out, and then I went ahead and shrunk it. So you can see how much this shrinks. This is the top part of this paper. So it actually shrinks to about almost a little bit more than half. So the way we're going to read this, and I know that I actually did this wrong. It starts with a 1, but it really should be a 0, right? So this 2, it's probably hard to see, is actually a 1. So that is 1 inch. So I can look on here and think, okay, I want my embellishments to be this big. And if I want them to be that big, then I need to print them out at 2 inches. I wanted mine to be about this size here, so then I'm going to be printing it out at 1.5 inches. So that's kind of how you read that. So let's get this ready. I'm just going to set this on top, and I'm going to tape it down to the paper just so it doesn't move around. And I'm just going to get some washi tape for that. Any tape is going to do, especially since you're not going to need to worry about wrecking the printed paper underneath, unless of course you want to save it for another time for making more, and you could definitely do that. So I'm just going to tape it down really well just so it doesn't move, and that should be good. All right, so I am going to do the Sharpie marker on top, and then I'm going to turn it over and we're going to draw on the back side. I think this would really help with it to look like it has some dimension. And I'm going to start in this corner and move all the way through just so I don't smear any of the marker. All right, so that actually didn't take too long. You can see that I did mess up here, and I'm thinking that I could probably wipe that off with some alcohol, but I may end up cutting right along the edge, so it might not matter. So I'm just going to take it off of the backing to make sure I got all of the black lines. Now, one thing that I want you to be aware of, first of all, we're not going for perfection here, right? And second of all, this is going to shrink down, so it's going to make these lines that look a little bit on the gray side, it's definitely going to make them look darker. So I'm just going to pill this up a little bit. And then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to color the back side. Oh, and I forgot to add these details. So let me do that. All right, so I'm just gonna fill in those missing lines, and then I'm actually gonna cut out each individual design. Originally, I was thinking that I was gonna adhere it down and have them all connected while I colored them. And then I thought, you know, it'd be a lot easier if I did them on a separate piece. And I just want you to realize that that plastic actually cuts out really well. So that's really nice, especially when it comes out to cutting each individual design. All right, so on to the coloring, just a couple things I want you to be aware of. So I wanted these to feel like they had a little bit of dimension. And so I am doing the Sharpie on the front, and then I'm going to be coloring on the back. So as you can see, I'm kind of overlapping on the back, or excuse me, on the black line. And that's because you're not going to be able to see it when you turn it over. So it's okay to kind of go into that black line because you will not notice it once you are completed. And I'm doing that because I really want it to look like it has dimension. So the lines are going to be on the top, and then the color will be on the bottom. And as it shrinks, the plastic gets thicker. And so it looks like it has some dimension. So the other thing that I wanted to make note of, as you're coloring, you can actually overlap colors. You can make this how you want it. You can allow the colors to bleed into one another. As you saw, I did a little bit of a gray shadow underneath the wings. So you can add some shadows, you can bleed them. Like I said, there's a lot of things that you can do for the tree. I could have added ornaments if I wanted, allowed that to dry, and then did the green around it. So it's just totally up to you how you want this to look. I just want you to realize that you can blend and have fun with your color. I actually think blending color is a little bit easier with the pencils. So if you had color pencils and you were using colored pencils, you could definitely blend colors together and it's a lot easier to do. I will show you a little bit later a few pieces that I made with color pencils so you can see the difference. I think they're both really beautiful and vibrant. And one thing that I think is really great, as you know, as you are coloring, and with Posca, you don't notice it as much because it kind of lays down thick, but you'll notice it at the end when I am coloring the bell. I ended up coloring the bell with the Karen marker, and this happens to be one of their metallic Karen markers. So I've tried it with the regular Karen markers and it kind of beads up onto the plastic. And so that doesn't work, but it actually worked really well with the metallic Karen marker. And I wasn't sure that it was going to, but it did. So you could use that if you have that pack. At any rate, I felt like you could see a lot of the lines and a lot of my colored lines, but when it shrunk down, a lot of the imperfections went away. And you'll notice that with your Sharpie as well. Some of those gray lines will get really sharp and get really black. So, you know, you won't necessarily have to worry about that. And this is what I'm talking about. And you'll see as I'm laying this down, you can kind of see it, how it kind of has lines, and that will minimize as I shrink it down, which is really nice. Another thing that I wanted to do is try and keep the colors consistent. I am thinking that I want to put this on one spread and maybe have them in a grid pattern. Not 100% sure, but that's one of the things that I'm thinking of. And so I really liked the idea of having, you know, yellow in each piece, or, something like that. If I used pink to use it in more than one, or if I used red to use it in more than one. So that was one of the things that I was really trying to do or think about as I was choosing my colors. All right, so the next step is going to be cutting it out, and you get to decide how you want to cut this out. I actually chose to cut it out right along the edge because that is the look I was going for. You could actually do a border if you wanted, or you could cut this out with a punch, maybe do a circle, or you could cut it out into a square if you wanted the embellishments to look a little bit more square. So it's totally up to you just how you want it to look. But I really liked the idea of it going right along the black edge. And then if you don't end up cutting it out just perfect, which is always the case for me, you can just fill in with some of the Sharpie. So the last thing I wanted to tell you when it came to cutting out this plastic, and I think this is probably the most important part, is you do not want to tear any of this plastic. So you want to be careful when there's a very tight edge, like you can see here, to use an X-ACTO. And it actually does cut out pretty well with an X-ACTO as long as you take it slow and go over it a couple of times. So any of these tight places where you feel like you really need to get your scissors in there and maneuver around, the best thing then is to use an X-ACTO. This plastic actually does tear pretty well, and there was a couple of pieces that I thought that I could get in there and it wasn't too tight, and it ended up being too tight and I ended up ripping the plastic. So just be careful as you're doing this. And of course, this would make it so much easier to then, just use like a circle punch and cut it out with a circle. But like I said, I really wanted the look of having each individual icon on its own. And so that's why I decided to do that. Again, you can see me using that X-ACTO in that tight place there. And like I said, it does cut out really well. So it's not a problem doing that. All right, you guys, so I'm actually going to cut through most of the cutting because A, I think it's sort of boring, and B, I didn't do a very good job of cutting on screen. But before I do that, just one more reminder that if you see any holes in your coloring, or if you didn't cut right along the edge, you can fill in with either some of the paint, or you could fill in on the edge with the Sharpie marker. So I just want you to be aware that you have both of those options available to you before you actually start to cook this. All right, you guys, so all my designs are done. They're painted, they're dried, they're all cut out, and they're ready to go in my toaster oven. So if you don't have a toaster oven, you could definitely do this with a regular oven, but I just thought it would be easiest to use my toaster oven since I had that. Definitely look at the package directions. I think mine says to cook it at 325, but definitely look at your plastic and see what it suggests. So I've got this metal pan that came with my toaster oven, and then I've lined it with some parchment. I'm doing that because it's going to be easier to take out. So there's a couple things I want you to be aware of as we are melting this. Number one, some longer designs, some, like skinnier, longer, like the ruler that I made that I'm showing you, those can begin to curl up as they are melting. That's one of the things that the plastic does is it curls. So if you've got some designs like that, I would definitely suggest getting another piece of parchment and just setting it over the top. And that way it kind of weighs it down a little bit as it's melting, that it won't curl on top of each other. And then the next thing that I would suggest is to have a book or something that's flat next to you. So when you pull these out and they're, still warm, that you can flatten them just to make sure that they are flat. So you want to do that while they're warm and they're still pliable before they begin to harden. All right, you guys, so I thought that I would show you this entire process, and then I'd be able to do this really cool sped up version to show you how it shrunk, because I think it is so cool. But what I realized is I was getting a lot of glare, but as I opened up the door, my oven was losing heat. So I was kind of struggling with to keep the door open or to not keep it open. And then as they started to melt, they did curl up. So some of those rounder ornaments started to curl up, and I started to panic, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to try and separate them, which you can do with some toothpicks. So maybe have some toothpicks on hand just in case. But what I noticed as I continued to let them melt down is that they separated themselves. The smaller they got, the more they evened out and the more they started to level off. And once they start to level off, you want to pull them out, like I said, when they're warm and put something on top of them to flatten them out. I used a book, but of course you could use whatever you have on hand. All right, you guys, so this is the finished product. I can't say enough for how much I love this. So like I said at the very beginning, we are not going for perfection here. These are homemade embellishments, and I love how they look. I love how some of the circles are a little bit wonky. I will let you know that if there are some spots on the back side that maybe did not fill in all the way, some paint, you could actually just add it on. Because it's going to be on the back side, you definitely would not notice that and it would not make a difference at all. But hopefully you're able to see how it looks 3D, where you've got the black on the top and then the color on the bottom. It definitely looks really cool in person. And one more thing I wanted you guys to be aware of, if you want to make this into a charm, you definitely could by punching a hole before you did the shrinking. So before I leave you, just a couple of things that I wanted to show you that you can also do with the shrink plastic. So I just kind of playing around and created some numbers, and I also created some letters. So these letters were done the same way in that I traced an alpha. So I printed out the alpha and then I traced it with pencil. So I used colored pencils on this one. You can see there's no black outline because I just want it to be the colored pencils. And then I cut it out and I used the X-ACTO to cut out the center there. So they're not perfect, but if you can see this one, I thought was really cool because it has the gradient. It kind of goes from pink to red. And you'll just see that with the colored pencils, you actually get a really great deep color. I thought those were really beautiful. So my idea for doing initials would then be to kind of highlight someone in my family, but of course you could do a word like joy, and I may end up doing something like that as well. Then for these numbers, I actually cut these out with the silhouette. So would you know, you can put that plastic through your silhouette and it will cut it out. There's even a shrink plastic setting in the silhouette. So I'm not sure if they have those on the Cricut or the Brother, but I'm sure you could, you know, just consult Google and find out what are some settings that you could use to cut out the shrink plastic. And then I colored them afterwards. So these were also colored with the Posca paint pens like I did with the icons. I could have done the pencil, but I just decided to do the paint pens here. And you can see that I got a little bit of variety doing the stripes. And then this one's kind of hard to see. This one I did polka dot, so it's a little bit harder to see with my hand, but hopefully you can see it on the table there. So I just want you guys to realize that there's a lot of options here using shrink plastic. Of course, you could buy some shrink plastic that allows you to print on it, and then you could cut with the silhouette and you could make some embellishments that way as well. So I just wanted you to see that there's a lot of different options for creating your own embellishments using shrink plastic. So anyway, you guys, thank you so much for being here. And if you like what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up and we will see you in the next one. Bye.